There were moments in your life when time just stops, when the air freezes in your lungs and all you hear is the sound of your own world breaking. This story is about the day my son, David, sat at my kitchen table and told me he had sold my home from under me. He told me the exact date I was to be gone, and that date, that cruel Tuesday, changed me forever. If this story sounds like something that has happened or could happen to someone you know, stay right there because what happens next, the nurse's whisper that changes everything, is the part you can't afford to miss. So before we dive deeper into this mess, please tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this heartbreaking drama unfold from? It makes me feel less alone, and if you feel that lump in your throat already, hit that like button to show your support and subscribe so you never miss another moment of my fight. Now, let me take you back to my flowered kitchen that terrible day. I had just made David his favorite tea, the Earl Grey with the extra bergamot, but he wouldn't even touch the cup. He just sat there, looking down at the wooden table, the table where he used to do his homework. Sarah, his wife, stood behind him, her arms crossed tight. Her face was set like concrete, hard and cold. She was the one who spoke first, her voice sharp like broken glass. She said, "Martha, we don't have all day. We need to talk about your living situation. David and I have careers and the children, and frankly, you need more care than we can give you." I tried to keep my voice steady. I said, "I'm fine, dear. I still cook, I clean, I still prune the roses in the garden." But she threw the fall back at me, the one where I broke my wrist. She said, "David has to rush over here every time you need something. It's not fair to him." That's when the word dropped. Sunny Glades. She called it a lovely community, but I knew it was a nursing home, a place you go to wait for the end. I looked at David, begging him with my eyes to deny it, to say, "No, Mom, we would never do that." But he just shifted in his seat and mumbled, "It's the sensible choice, Mom. We agreed." We agreed? My own son was using that word sensible to cover up a betrayal that cut me to the bone? Sarah was quick to seal the deal. She said, "We've already paid the deposit, Martha. A van is coming next week." And that's when the real knife twisted. She said, "We need to sell the house quickly. The market is hot right now." The house my husband and I bought with our first savings, the house where David took his first steps, was being sold for quick cash? I finally managed to speak. My voice was just a ghost of a whisper. "You're selling the house, David? My home?" His head snapped up. Guilt was written all over his face, but he tried to hide it behind a rushed explanation. He said, "We have to, Mom. It's the only way to afford a good place and help with the fees. We need the money." He needed the money more than he needed his mother's peace or his father's memory. I stood up slowly. The silence in the kitchen was thick with my unspoken grief. I walked over to the window to look at the roses, my husband's roses, the ones I still tended, and I just nodded. I asked them, "When is the van coming?" And David said, "Next Tuesday, Mom. Next Tuesday. Just 6 days away." I felt a cold dread settle over me, a deep, terrible certainty that my life, as I knew it, was over. I watched my two loved ones leave my kitchen, my son and his wife. They didn't touch me, they didn't hug me, just hurried off to their sensible, important life, leaving me alone with the ghost of Tuesday, a date circled in black on my calendar, a date of final abandonment. Tuesday came dressed in a cold gray sky. The moving van was a big, rumbling beast that swallowed the memories whole. Two strangers in overalls carried out the chairs, the tables, the pictures, the ghost of my life. David and Sarah stood on the driveway, watching. Sarah pointing, giving instructions. David just stood back looking like a shame-faced boy. I sat on a folding chair on the porch. I didn't cry, I just watched the finality of it all, a quiet acceptance of the end. David finally walked up to me, his face pale. He said, "Mom, the car is ready. We need to go now. You just bring your purse and that small suitcase we packed." I asked him if he packed my husband's picture, the one from his Navy days, and he said, "Yes, Mom, Sarah made sure of it. It's time." He helped me up. His touch was hesitant and distant, a formal gesture, not a loving one. I walked past the empty rose bushes, past the porch swing, and I got into the back seat of their shining new black SUV. The silence in the car was thick and suffocating. Sarah drove, David sat in the passenger seat, and I was alone in the back watching my house disappear in the rearview mirror, a blur of faded paint and broken dreams. Sunny Glades wasn't sunny at all. It was a massive brick building that smelled faintly of antiseptic and despair. The lobby was grand but hollow, filled with weak sunlight and fake plants. It looked expensive, but it felt empty of human warmth. A young woman came to greet me. She wore a crisp uniform and a name tag that read, Nurse Anna. She had kind eyes, a rare sight in this place. She said, "Welcome, Martha. I'm Anna. I'll be helping you settle in. Your room is number 304 on the 3rd floor." Sarah immediately took charge, barking instructions about my medication and schedule. David just stood back, looking like a nervous tourist. They took me up in the elevator to room 304. It was small, clean, and impersonal. A single bed, a small desk, a chair. It was nothing like my home. Sarah said, "See, Martha, it's wonderful, clean, safe. You'll be very happy here. We made the right choice. We need to get back now. David has an important meeting." David said, "We'll call you tomorrow, Mom, we promise." They didn't hug me, a quick pat on the shoulder from David, a brisk wave from Sarah, and they were gone, leaving me alone in the doorway of my tiny new prison. Nurse Anna came over and gently took my hand. Her touch was warm and real. I felt a sudden rush of tears. I hadn't cried all day, but her unexpected kindness broke me. I said, "My son, he just left me, Anna. He just left me." Nurse Anna didn't say anything. She just nodded and led me to the small sitting area. She brought me a coffee and a warm blanket, and then she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a low, urgent tone, her eyes scanning the empty hallway. This was the moment the whisper, the forbidden information whispered. Nurse Anna said, "Martha, listen to me very carefully. I shouldn't be telling you this, but you need to know. I saw the paperwork, the payment plan. Your son and his wife, they didn't just put a deposit down. They chose the non-refundable all-inclusive plan, the one they only use for people they expect to be here for a very long time, the one that transfers ownership of the house immediately after 30 days. You need to call someone who can help before that deed is signed. This isn't about care, Martha. This is about the house. They want to make sure you can never go back." The coffee cup dropped from my hand, shattering on the floor. The sound was sharp and final, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Betrayal suddenly had a price tag? A non-refundable one? David didn't just want me safe, he wanted me silenced and sealed away forever. The emotional shock was immense. My whole body trembled. I looked at Anna, her kind eyes now wide with fear and urgency, and I whispered, "The house, my husband's legacy." Anna quickly gathered the broken pieces, her face tight with worry. She said, "I'll clean this up. You need to act now, Martha. You need a lawyer. You need someone on the outside. I'll get you a phone book, I'll stand guard, but you have to make the call now before it's too late." This whisper, this forbidden piece of information changed everything. It snapped me out of my grief and into a desperate fight for survival. The silent agreement, the shame, the resignation all melted away, replaced by a fierce, burning anger, a mother's instinct to protect what was hers, what was left of her life and her husband's memory. I nodded to Anna, my eyes now steel cold and focused. The tears were gone, replaced by a clear, hard determination. I reached for the phone book Anna handed me. The war for my home had just begun, and it started with one dangerous secret whispered in a sterile nursing home hallway. The blood rushed to my head the moment that little paper telephone directory hit my trembling hand. Anna's face was pressed close to mine. She said, "Remember, Martha, 30 days. That's all the time you have before the house is legally gone. Transferred. The clock is ticking." I felt the paper slipping, but I gripped it tight. The betrayal was a hot, searing coal in my stomach, turning my grief into a cold, hard resolve.
I had been a woman drowning in sorrow. Now I was a fighter, clawing my way back to the surface. David and Sarah didn't just want me taken care of. They wanted me buried under layers of legal paperwork so they could cash in on my life's biggest treasure, my home, my husband's legacy. I asked Anna if she had a lawyer's name, a local name, someone fast and trustworthy. She shook her head sadly and said, "I only know the names of the doctors in the pharmacy, Martha. I can't risk giving you anything official. If they find out I helped you, I'll lose my job and my license." But she whispered, "I saw an advertisement in the break room window just yesterday. There was a small law firm called Family First Legal. They specialized in elder law. Maybe that's a sign. Maybe they're the ones you need to call." It wasn't much, but in that moment of absolute isolation, that single name felt like a lifeline thrown from a sinking ship. Anna told me to go into the bathroom. It was the only room with a lock where I could have a moment of privacy in this place where walls felt like they had ears. I remember sitting on the closed toilet lid, the thin yellow pages of that phone book spread across my lap, my fingers shaking as I found the listing, Family First Legal. The phone number was 7 digits. That felt like a secret code to my freedom. I took a deep breath, a breath that tasted of cleaning fluids and fear, and I dialed the number. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the sound would carry right through the thin walls. A kind but professional woman answered the phone. Her voice was clear and steady, a sharp contrast to the chaos inside me. I whispered my name, Martha, and told her I needed help immediately with an elder law matter, a problem with my son and a house. She asked me to explain the situation, to give her the quick facts, and I told her everything about David, about Sarah, about the sale of my house, about the cruel, non-refundable contract, and about the 30-day deadline to transfer the deed. My voice was shaky, but I forced the words out clear and sharp. I could almost hear the click of the lawyer's pen on the other end of the line taking notes. She told me her name was Carol and that I needed to speak to a senior partner named Mr. Davies. She said he handles these kinds of emergency cases where financial exploitation is suspected. I had to wait. Carol put me on hold, and the music was that cheap elevator stuff. But to me, it was the sound of hope building. I waited what felt like an hour, but was probably only 3 minutes. And then a deep, measured voice came on the line. It was Mr. Davies. He asked me to confirm the nursing home name, Sunnyglades, and the crucial detail, the non-refundable all-inclusive contract. I told him, "Yes, Mr. Davies, that's right. I'm here under false pretenses. My son thinks he's trapped me here to take the house." He asked me a question that stopped my breathing. He said, "Martha, is your husband still alive?" I had to catch my voice to answer. I said, "No, sir. He passed away 5 years ago from a long illness. But he left the house to me and my son David equally. The deed is in both our names." That detail, the equal ownership, was the second hammer blow that hit me. That meant David had a legal right to start the sale process, even if I didn't agree. Mr. Davies sighed, a long, professional sigh, and then he delivered the hard truth. He said, "Martha, because the deed is joint, your son has the power to initiate the sale. He is legally a part owner. But the 30-day transfer is where we fight." He said that specific non-refundable all-inclusive contract they chose is a classic sign of premeditated divestment, or what some people call predatory care planning. It suggests they intended to use your assets to pay for your long-term confinement, making sure you couldn't access that money to fight them. He said, "That is very, very serious, and a judge will not look kindly on it." He said, "We have a window, Martha, a small window of opportunity." He told me what I needed to do immediately. He said, "I need you to find every single piece of financial mail you have, any bank statement, any insurance policy, any document that has your name on it, and I need you to put it aside." He said, "Your son and his wife will try to control your access to information now that you're in their chosen facility." I must have looked confused, because he added, "You need documentation, Martha, proof that you are of sound mind and capable of managing your own affairs." I asked him how I was supposed to get documents when all my belongings were in the tiny suitcase David had packed, and he said, "Start small, Martha. Start with your purse, your wallet, your immediate belongings." I told him I was trapped inside this place and I couldn't just walk out, and he said, "That's the next part of the plan. We can file an emergency injunction to halt the sale. But to do that, we need 2 things. One, we need proof that your son misrepresented the nature of your stay, and 2, we need to establish an immediate face-to-face consultation to confirm your competency. He said, I need to meet you tomorrow, not here, not at Sunny Glades, but outside where you can speak freely. Can you get out of there for an hour? He needed me to make an escape, a temporary one, just for a meeting with a lawyer. My mind raced. I pictured the front door, the security guards, the sign-out sheet. I told Mr. Davies I didn't think I could just leave. They watch us closely. And he said, then we have to be creative. Is there a garden, a public area near the facility where I can meet you? I'll drive a plain car, nothing flashy, and I won't mention anything about this place to anyone. I promised him I would try. I promised I would find a way to meet him the next day. And with that one desperate call to a stranger, I had a sliver of hope, a single chance to fight back against the betrayal of my own son. I hung up the phone and walked out of the bathroom, my heart still pounding, but now it was a drumbeat of determination, not of fear. Nurse Anna was waiting for me, pretending to wipe down a nearby table. She looked at my face and saw the change, the fight in my eyes. She didn't ask any questions, she just whispered one word. Did you? And I just nodded, a single silent agreement between two women united by a dangerous secret.
The phone book was hidden under the thin mattress, a secret I now shared only with Anna, and the deep ache of my fear. I was back in my tiny room, number 304. The walls were a bland cream color, and they seemed to mock the vibrant life I had just lost. I had to get documents, Mr. Davies said, proof of sound mind and money matters, but all I had was the small overnight bag my son had packed. It was a cruel joke, a tiny suitcase full of useless necessities and no information. I dumped the contents of the bag onto the stiff white bedspread. There was my pill organizer with the little days marked out, a pair of sensible shoes, 3 nightgowns, and a few folded sweaters. David and Sarah had made sure there were no files, no bank statements, no insurance policies, not even a single piece of business stationery. I felt a wave of crushing panic. They had done this so cleanly, so deliberately. They wanted me completely blind and defenseless. My hands tore through the clothes, my breathing getting shallow, a desperate, frantic energy coursed through me like an electric shock. Then I reached the bottom, and there was the photo album David had mentioned, a heavy leather book full of 50 years of our life. I opened it quickly, my husband's smile staring back at me, his Navy picture standing stiff and proud on the deck of a ship. I clutched it to my chest, letting the love and the memory of his strength steady my racing heart. I knew he wouldn't want me to give up. This house was his dream too. It was his promise to me. I decided to check the photo album itself. The pages were thick cardboard divided by tissue paper, and as I flipped through the pictures of David as a baby and our wedding day, I noticed one page looked a little thicker, a little stiffer than the rest. I ran my hand over the page, feeling a faint crinkle beneath the picture of David's high school graduation. With trembling fingers, I peeled back the edge of the photo. It wasn't glued down, it was just held by those 4 corner slots. And tucked beneath the photograph was a thin, folded slip of paper, yellowed at the edges. It was an old deposit slip, an ATM receipt from 3 weeks ago, showing a large transfer of money into my savings account. It wasn't much, but it had my full name, my current account number, and the date, just days before they moved me here. It was undeniable proof that I had active control over my finances and a large sum of money, a clear demonstration of competency and financial control. And crucially, David and Sarah must have missed it because it was tucked inside this precious memory book. Thank God for my love of photographs. I quickly smoothed the receipt and tucked it deep inside my bra, the only place I knew they would never search. It felt like a tiny paper shield against the giant fortress of Sunny Glades. The rest of the hunt was a bust. My purse only contained my ID and $20 in cash, nothing useful. I had to rely on that single slip of yellow paper and my wits. I spent the next hour pacing the small room, memorizing the layout of the facility. I knew from my short tour yesterday that the front desk was manned by a kindly but very strict security guard named Mr. Henderson. He always wore a bow tie, and he never let anyone pass the lobby without signing them in or out. I knew I couldn't just walk out and meet Mr. Davies. They had a rule, a policy, that residents must be escorted by staff or a family member to leave the building. I had to find a way to distract Mr. Henderson or slip past him. I remembered a small side door near the dining hall that was only used for deliveries. I had seen a large linen cart parked near it yesterday. It was a crazy thought, a desperate one, but I started to form a plan,
a risky plan that depended entirely on one kind nurse. Later that evening, Anna brought me my nightly medication tray, a small plastic cup with a few pills and a glass of water. She didn't speak, but as she leaned in to hand me the tray, she gently adjusted the warm blanket over my shoulders and her fingers brushed my ear, just a flicker of contact, and she whispered, "I heard the plan. I know the time." She squeezed my hand once, and then she was gone, moving on to the next room, pretending everything was normal. But in that second, we had established a pact, an understanding that tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, when the morning rush of deliveries and visitors was at its peak, I was going to try to walk out of Sunny Glades. And if I failed, I would be trapped forever. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with the sweet, intoxicating taste of defiance. Tomorrow was my 30-day deadline starting, and I would not spend it here. The night was endless. A cold, thin blanket of worry spread over me. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds, counting the breaths, waiting for the sun to rise and for the clock to hit 10, the time Anna had confirmed for our daring little plan. Every creak of the floor, every distant sound of a night nurse checking a room sent a jolt of panic through me. I clutched the yellow bank slip taped securely inside my clothing like a talisman, a tiny, fragile piece of proof against my son's giant lie. When the morning light finally crept through the window, it was weak and hesitant, but it gave me a fierce new energy. I dressed quickly in my most neutral sweater and my sensible shoes, the ones that could walk fast. I tried to look normal, calm, like any other resident preparing for a quiet day of activities, but my stomach was tied in knots. I knew Mr. Henderson, the guard at the front desk, would be watching everyone. He took his bowtie and his duty very seriously. At 9:30, I left my room deliberately early and walked slowly towards the dining hall. The place was buzzing with the morning bustle, the smell of burnt toast and weak coffee hanging in the air. This KOS was my ally. I didn't go into the dining hall. Instead, I lingered near the corridor that led to the service entrance, the one with the delivery door. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and determination. At 5 minutes to 10, I saw her, Nurse Anna. She pushed a large metal laundry cart down the service corridor. It wasn't the usual small cart. This one was massive, piled high with white sheets and towels, reaching almost to the ceiling. She was pushing it alone, and she was struggling visibly, pretending to strain, and then she reached the delivery door, which was propped open with a heavy rubber wedge to allow the outside linen service to drop off the clean supply. Anna positioned the cart right next to the open door, effectively blocking the view of the small alcove next to the linen storage where I was hiding. As she fumbled with the clasp on the side of the cart, she looked up and her eyes met mine. A silent message passed between us. "This is it, Martha, now or never." I knew what I had to do. I had to use the cart as cover and slip out through that propped open door into the open air before Mr. Henderson saw me from the lobby 20 feet away. I waited for the precise second. A large man from the delivery service walked past carrying a giant bag of clean towels. The distraction was perfect. In that moment, I moved. I pushed myself against the wall, flattened my body, and darted behind Anna's massive laundry cart, the white linen towering over me. I moved silently, quickly, like a frightened mouse. Using the cart as my shield, I slipped around the back and stepped through the propped open service door. The cold, fresh air hit my face like a slap, a shocking blast of freedom. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I didn't even risk thanking Anna. I heard her immediately call out, "Oh dear, this clasp is stuck. I must get help." Her voice a clever diversion that would buy me precious seconds. Outside, I kept walking fast, but trying to maintain a slow, resident-like pace so I wouldn't draw attention. I was on the access road of Sunny Glades, a small paved loop that led out to the main public road where Mr. Davies would be waited. I had never walked this fast in years. My sensible shoes pounded lightly on the pavement. I passed the manicured flower beds, the sign with the welcoming, sunny message. A cruel lie, if ever there was one. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a target painted on my back. I kept expecting to hear a shout, Mr. Henderson calling me back, or David's black SUV pulling up to drag me inside. Finally, I saw it. A dark gray sedan parked casually on the shoulder of the public road, just outside the gate. It was exactly as Mr. Davies had described, plain, nothing flashy. The driver was sitting inside, reading a newspaper, with his window slightly down. I walked right up to the car and tapped lightly on the glass. The man lowered his paper and looked up. He had a kind face, serious but trustworthy, with sharp, intelligent eyes. He didn't need to ask if I was Martha. I was the only woman walking out of Sunny Glades on foot at 10 in the morning. He opened the back door immediately and said softly, "Get in, Martha. We don't have much time." I slipped into the back seat, sinking onto the leather, feeling safe for the first time in days. I immediately reached under my clothes and pulled out the precious yellow bank slip, my only proof. I handed it to him, my hand still shaking. He took it without a word, unfolding the old paper and examining the date and the account number. His eyes flickered over the details, and then he looked back at me, his expression grim but determined. He said, "This is a good start, Martha. This proves competency and financial control. Now, we need to talk fast. I've brought the emergency injunction paperwork. We are going to file this today before closing time to freeze the sale of your home before that 30-day clock can run out." The fight was truly on. It wasn't just a phone call anymore. I was sitting in a lawyer's car on the side of the road with one foot out of the prison my son had built for me, and I had a chance. A real, honest-to-goodness chance at getting my life and my home back. I sat in that quiet sedan on the side of the road with Mr. Davies, and for the first time since Tuesday, I felt power returning to my own hands. He had spread out a stack of papers on the seat beside him, legal documents with important-sounding headings like Petition for Emergency Temporary Restraining Order and Affidavit of Undue Influence. The words were complicated, but the meaning was beautifully simple. This was my weapon against David's betrayal. Mr. Davies looked at the yellow bank slip again, and then back at me, his eyes drilling right into mine. He said, "Martha, I need you to confirm 3 things very clearly under oath for this document. This is the core of our case. 1. Did your son and his wife give you the impression that your placement at Sunny Glades was temporary or for recovery?" I said, "Yes. David told me it was just to get me back on my feet after the fall." 2. Did they inform you before you arrived that they were simultaneously arranging the immediate sale of your property and the full, non-refundable transfer of the deed? I said emphatically, "No, they lied to my face. I only found out because of the nurse." And 3. Do you feel that you have been coerced or unfairly influenced into this arrangement, and do you want to return to your home immediately? I said, "Absolutely, yes, Mr. Davies, I want my home back." He nodded once, a sharp, concise motion, and started filling in the affidavit rapidly with a heavy black pen. He explained that the emergency injunction would be filed electronically immediately to the local circuit court. It essentially puts a giant stop sign on the sale of my house and freezes all assets related to my care at Sunny Glades until a judge can hear my side of the story. He said, "By 4 o'clock this afternoon, the court will have issued an order and my son David will know he has been challenged." I felt a cold thrill of fear and satisfaction. David was going to find out I was fighting back. The silence was going to be broken in the most dramatic way possible. Mr. Davies warned me, though. He said, "Martha, once this injunction is served, your son and daughter-in-law will react. They will likely try to paint you as confused or incompetent to nullify the injunction. They might try to change your care plan or restrict your communications. You need to be strong and you need to be smart." He asked me about my relationship with David and Sarah before all this. Was there a history of arguments about money or control? I told him about the years of quiet tension, how Sarah had always been quick to point out the expense of the old house, how she often complained about David spending time driving to check on me. I told him about the subtle pressure, the hints that I was becoming a burden. I realized then it wasn't a sudden decision. It was a slow, calculated move years in the making. Mr. Davies told me to sign the papers, and I signed them. Martha Davies. My handwriting was shaky, but the lines were clear and firm. With that single signature, I launched a legal war against my own son. He handed me a card with his direct office number and another number, which was a confidential mental health advocacy hotline. He said, "Martha, if they try to change your medication or limit your access to visitors or phones, you call this number immediately. You are a capable woman and you have rights." Then came the moment of return. He said, "I need to drop you off now before your absence is noticed. Remember the cover story. If anyone asks where you were, you say you were out on the grounds, walking in the courtyard, you felt faint and had to sit down alone, and you lost track of time. Keep it simple and stick to it." I looked back toward the imposing brick building of Sunny Glades. It looked like a prison designed for the comfort of the wealthy and the elderly. My stomach churned, but I knew I had to go back. I needed to be inside when that injunction hit. Mr. Davies drove me back to the same spot near the service entrance. I got out of the car, the yellow bank slip now safe in my purse next to the signed legal card, and I thanked him. I looked him right in the eye and said, "Thank you for believing me, Mr. Davies." He just nodded and said, "You are a mother fighting for your home, Martha. I believe in the evidence and I believe in your strength." He drove off quietly, leaving me standing by the side of the road with the biggest secret I had ever kept in my life. I walked back toward the service entrance, trying to regulate my breathing, trying to look like a woman who had just enjoyed a brisk morning stroll. I slipped back inside the facility through the propped door. The chaos of the morning was starting to settle. The hallways were quieter, the dining room almost empty. I walked slowly past the front desk. Mr. Henderson was distracted, fussing with the sign-out sheet. I made it back to my room without a single soul questioning my absence. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, exhausted but exhilarated. The morning's great gamble was complete. Now all I could do was wait for 4 o'clock, wait for the legal documents to land on David's desk, wait for the inevitable, furious phone call that would shatter the silence of my betrayal. The war was coming to my son, and I was ready for the fight. The waiting was the hardest part. It was a silent torture stretched across the long afternoon. I sat in my small room, not daring to lie down, not daring to even look out the window. I just stared at the blank wall, willing the hands of the clock to move faster. Every nurse, every aide who knocked on my door felt like an FBI agent coming to arrest me for my secret escape in my illegal ambush. I kept thinking about Nurse Anna. I worried desperately for her. If David found out she helped me, her kindness would cost her everything. I ate a quick dry lunch in my room, saying I wasn't feeling well to avoid the communal dining room where too many eyes might observe me or ask questions. I needed solitude to fortify my mind and protect my secret. The little yellow bank slip was tucked away safe, but the sheer audacity of what I had done weighed heavily on me. I had launched a serious legal assault against my only son, a boy I had once held in my arms. But my anger at the cold, calculated way he had tried to strip me of my dignity and my home fueled my resolve. Around 3:30, I decided I couldn't bear the isolation anymore. I needed to be in a public area when the news hit. I needed to see the reaction. I walked slowly to the main sitting lounge, a large room with uncomfortable modern sofas and a big television, always tuned to some bland news channel. I found a seat in the corner, pretending to read a 2-day-old magazine, but really I was watching the front desk through the glass wall, waiting for the storm. 4 o'clock came and went. Nothing happened. No sirens, no panicked phone calls, no sudden appearances from David. I started to feel a terrible sinking doubt. Maybe Mr. Davies couldn't file the papers in time. Maybe my son was too powerful. Maybe this whole desperate escape was for nothing. I was about to give up and head back to my room when the phone at the front desk rang. Not the soft, internal ring, but a sharp, insistent buzz that cut through the quiet hum of the lounge. Mr. Henderson, the bow-tied security guard, answered it, and immediately his face changed from placid boredom to wide-eyed astonishment. He started nodding vigorously, and then he lowered his voice to a hiss, saying, "Yes, sir, I understand. Yes, a legal document, I see. I'll check the fax machine right away." He hung up the phone and his eyes darted nervously around the lounge, scanning the faces of the few residents there. His eyes passed right over me, but I knew that was the moment David had received the emergency injunction. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A subtle tension entered the room. The air felt electric, heavy with unseen conflict. A few minutes later, the head administrator, Mr. Sterling, a stiff man who wore ties tighter than Sarah's face, walked quickly out of his office, his face a mask of shock and annoyance. He whispered fiercely to Mr. Henderson, telling him to check the legal fax line again and confirm the order. I watched them from my corner, pretending to be engrossed in an article about knitting patterns, but every fiber of my being was vibrating with adrenaline. The real explosion came later, around 6 o'clock during the dinner hour. I had forced myself to go down to the dining hall, hoping to blend in, but I couldn't eat the dry chicken and mashed potatoes. I just pushed them around on my plate. Everyone was talking quietly when the side door burst open and David strode in. He wasn't wearing his usual crisp shirt. He looked disheveled. His face was red, blotchy, with a mixture of disbelief and pure, furious rage. He marched straight up to the head administrator, Mr. Sterling, who was trying to look calm near the podium. David didn't even lower his voice. He pointed a shaking finger at the administrator and shouted, "What is the meaning of this injunction? What right do you have to freeze the sale of my property?" He was so loud that every single resident stopped eating. The clatter of forks on ceramic plates died away, and the entire dining room fell into a stunned silence. I sat there watching my son, my grown, successful boy, acting like a spoiled child whose favorite toy had just been taken away. It was humiliating, and yet I felt a strange sense of vindication. His public display of fury proved everything I had told Mr. Davies. He wasn't worried about my care, he was worried about the money. Mr. Sterling was trying to pull David aside, saying softly, "Mr. Davies, please, we can discuss this in my office. This is highly inappropriate." But David wasn't listening. He just yelled, "I want to see my mother now. Where is she? This entire facility is under a restraining order," he screamed. And he scanned the room, his furious eyes searching for me. I knew I couldn't hide any longer. I pushed my chair back slowly, the scrape of the legs against the linoleum echoing in the silent room. I stood up straight and tall and looked directly at him. Our eyes locked across the dining hall. The distance felt like 1,000 miles, and I spoke, my voice clear, steady, and ringing with the strength I hadn't felt in years. I said, "I'm right here, David." And then I added a single word that shattered his composure. "Stop." His jaw dropped, his face going from red fury to a ghastly white shock. He hadn't expected me to fight back. He hadn't expected me to be articulate. He had expected a sad, confused old woman meekly eating her dinner. He had expected silence. But all he got was a mother ready for war. David was frozen in the middle of the dining hall, looking at me like I was a ghost risen from the grave. The entire room was watching. Every resident, every aide, every nervous staff member held their breath. The silence stretched taut like a piano wire, ready to snap. I walked slowly toward him, my steps measured, deliberate. I didn't rush. I wanted him to feel every second of my approach, every heartbeat of his public humiliation. I stopped a safe distance away, and I kept my voice low, so only the people closest could hear, but the force behind my words carried across the room. I said, "David, you were so worried about your important meeting that you forgot about the most important thing: integrity." I asked him why he thought he needed to file a non-refundable contract, a contract designed to trap me here forever, if he was only planning for a short stay for my recovery. Sarah suddenly appeared, rushing into the dining hall. She must have been waiting in the car or the lobby. She saw David standing there, red-faced and exposed, and she instantly took control. Her face was a masterpiece of cold fury mixed with fake concern. She walked right up to me and put a hand on my arm, but I pulled away sharply, shrugging off her touch like a physical stain. Sarah's voice was high and saccharine, too loud for the room. She said, "Oh, Martha, darling, what has gotten into you? You are clearly distressed. We need to get you back to your room. David, look, she's having a moment. She's obviously confused and not thinking straight. This is exactly what we were worried about. Trying to paint me as the crazy old lady who didn't know her own mind, but I was ready for her. I had anticipated this exact tactic." I looked at Sarah and smiled, a tight, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. And I said, "Confused am I, Sarah? Or am I simply confused about why my son and his wife decided that the best way to handle my supposed recovery was to immediately sell the house my late husband left me, a house David himself still co-owns?" I paused, letting that word co-owns hang in the air for everyone to process that they were selling my dead husband's dream for profit. The residents started murmuring, low, worried sounds of disbelief and judgment. Even the staff looked uncomfortable. Mr. Sterling, the administrator, was frantic. He stepped between us, trying to maintain some decorum. He said, "Martha, Mr. David, we must take this to my office. The residents are unsettled." But I wasn't finished. I looked directly at David and I threw his own words back at him. I said, "David, you told me this was the sensible choice. Tell me, son, which part was sensible? The part where you lied to me about the non-refundable fee? Or the part where you tried to steal my father's photograph, the one from his Navy days when you packed my bag?" That was a calculated lie. I knew the photo was packed, but it hit David where it hurt. The memory of his father, the shock of being publicly accused of such petty theft, made him stammer. He opened his mouth, trying to find words, trying to defend himself, but Sarah cut in again, her face hardening into granite. She said, "This is financial abuse, Martha. This is defamation. David, we are leaving. We will deal with this legally tomorrow." David, however, looked defeated. The fight had gone out of him. He looked like the terrified 10-year-old boy I caught smoking behind the shed. His eyes were fixed on the floor. He just whispered to Sarah, "We have to go," Sarah pulling at her arm. He allowed her to physically drag him out of the dining room, past the silent, watching residents. The whole confrontation couldn't have lasted more than 3 minutes, but it felt like an eternity, a public spectacle that cemented the truth for everyone watching. As they left the room, the silence broke, not into chatter, but into a quiet wave of quiet concern. Several elderly ladies patted my arm as I walked back to my corner seat. One woman leaned in and whispered, "You showed them, dearie. You stand up for yourself." I realized then that my confrontation had done more than just humiliate David. It had won me the silent allegiance of the residents and the staff. They now knew I wasn't just another forgotten old woman. I was a woman who was wronged and who was fighting back. I finished my dinner, cold and alone, but no longer defeated. I had struck the first blow, and it landed perfectly. Now, I knew David and Sarah would be spending the night talking to their lawyers, trying to figure out how to counter the emergency injunction. The real battle, the legal back and forth, was about to begin. But I had my lawyer, Mr. Davies. I had my yellow bank slip, and most importantly, I had the moral high ground. I had the truth. And that was a weapon more powerful than any amount of money. The quiet after the confrontation was deceptive. It felt like the eye of a hurricane, a brief moment of calm before the real storm hit. I knew David and Sarah would not take that public humiliation lightly, especially Sarah. Her need for control was written all over her face when she dragged my son away. I spent the evening back in my room waiting, bracing myself for the immediate counterattack. The phone didn't ring, no one came to check on me, but the silence felt heavy, ominous, like a threat hanging just outside the door. I was restless. I walked to the window, watching the headlights of cars pass outside the facility gate, feeling the crushing realization that my fight had just begun, and it was gonna be ugly. I kept remembering the look on David's face, the shock, the shame, the sheer surprise that his old mother could still stand up and yell. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. Just after 10 o'clock, when the facility was deep in its nightly quiet, a soft but urgent rap came at my door. Not the loud, official knock of an aide, but a gentle tap that sounded like a secret code. I knew immediately it was Anna. I hurried to the door and unlocked it. She slipped inside quickly, her face pale and drawn. She was wearing her coat over her uniform, ready to leave her shift. Anna didn't waste any time. She spoke in a low, rapid whisper, her voice tight with worry. She said, "Mirtha, I saw the administrator, Mr. Sterling, talking on the phone for an hour right after your son left. I heard snippets, enough to know they are changing your file. She said they are preparing to argue that you are experiencing acute paranoia and memory issues. They are going to push for a reevaluation first thing tomorrow morning, a formal competency hearing. This is Sarah's revenge, Martha. They want to discredit your lawyer and nullify that injunction by proving you are not of sound mind." My blood ran cold. This was exactly the countermove Mr. Davies had warned me about. If they could get a doctor within their system at Sunnyglades to sign off that I was incompetent, my entire legal effort would collapse. That single yellow bank slip proving my financial control would suddenly mean nothing. I gripped Anna's hand tight. Her honesty, her courage, and risking her job for me filled me with gratitude and a renewed sense of urgency. Anna continued speaking urgently. She said, "They're restricting your communication starting tonight. No outgoing calls and no visitors except David and Sarah. They want to isolate you. But I did something I shouldn't have, Martha. I took a risk. I went into the records room and printed out a copy of your medication sheet. The sheet shows you're only on low-dose blood pressure medication and a vitamin supplement. No heavy psychotropic drugs that would indicate confusion or paranoia. This is your proof, Martha. This is what you show Mr. Davies." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and pressed it into my hand. It was cold, crisp, and illegal. It was a document that proved my sanity, a document that could literally save my house and my life. I thanked her, a silent thank you conveyed through the desperate squeeze of our hands. She was risking everything for a woman she had just met because she sought a profound injustice. Anna then gave me the final piece of vital information. She said, "Your son, David, called the front desk just before I left. He booked a private visit for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, an official meeting with you and the facility's social worker. He said he wants to resolve this amicably, but Martha, that's a lie. He wants to intimidate you before the competency test. He wants to make you look stressed and unstable to the social worker." She told me to hold my ground, to not let David provoke me, to stay calm and rational when he tried to twist the knife. She gave me a quick hug, a fast, nervous embrace that spoke volumes about her fear and her loyalty. And then she was gone, slipping out the door and locking it behind her, leaving me alone with my new secret evidence, my medication sheet, a silent witness to my clear head and my current health. I hid the sheet, along with the bank slip, deep inside my purse. Then I sat down and began to rehearse for tomorrow's 9 a.m. showdown. I knew David would be coming in full attack mode, trying to break me down before the official evaluation. But I had Anna's warning and Mr. Davies' advice to stay strong and rational. I looked at my reflection in the dark window and I straightened my back. I was not paranoid. I was not confused. I was a mother who had just been betrayed, and I was ready to face the consequences, ready to face my son and fight for my home.
9 o'clock the next morning felt like the opening bell for the final round of a heavyweight boxing match. I was sitting in a small private conference room right next to Mr. Sterling's office, a neutral but intimidating space. The room was sterile with a round wooden table and 3 stiff-backed chairs. I sat completely still, waiting, my posture straight, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I was rehearsing the calm, rational replies I would give to every accusation David might throw at me. The door opened and David walked in first, followed by Sarah, and then a pleasant-looking woman carrying a clipboard. I immediately recognized the look in the social worker's eyes, a mix of professional neutrality and subtle skepticism. They had briefed her already.
They had painted me as the difficult, confused mother causing trouble. The woman introduced herself as Miss Lewis, the facility's dedicated social services liaison. She sat down and gave me a polite but reserved smile. David didn't even say, "Hello, Mom." He launched right into the attack before Miss Lewis could even open her folder. He slammed a copy of the emergency injunction down on the table, the paper rattling the silence. He said in a voice heavy with false distress, "Martha, this is utterly heartbreaking. How could you do this to us? We tried so hard to find you a safe place, and you immediately run off and file legal paperwork based on some delusion that we are trying to steal your home." Sarah immediately chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial tears. She said, "We were just so worried, Martha. You were clearly confused when you signed this. It says we are financially exploiting you. That's a terrible accusation. David is devastated. You know how much he loves you. He just wants to help you get better, and look at all the money you're wasting on lawyers for this nonsense." I let them talk. I let the accusations hang in the air. I watched Miss Lewis's eyes darting between me and the hostile pair. She was watching for my reaction, waiting for the expected explosion of hysterical paranoia. I took a deep breath, and when I finally spoke, my voice was low, steady, and perfectly reasonable. I addressed Miss Lewis, not David or Sarah. I said, "Miss Lewis, I understand my son is upset, and I appreciate your being here to mediate this. But I want to clarify one point for the record. I asked my son to explain why he chose a non-refundable all-inclusive contract, a contract that ensures I cannot leave or be taken out of this facility without losing this substantial fee, and simultaneously he was moving forward with the immediate sale of my house within 30 days. I said I simply want to understand the sensible choice David claimed he was making." David tried to interrupt, shouting that the contract was standard procedure, but I held up one hand, a simple gesture that silenced him, and I maintained eye contact with Miss Lewis. I continued, "I am not delusional, Miss Lewis. I am reacting to a series of calculated financial decisions that clearly suggest a plan for divestment, not care. If their intention was recovery, why the non-refundable trap? And why the rush to sell my home within 30 days before my so-called recovery was complete?" Miss Lewis stopped writing on her clipboard and looked at David and Sarah, waiting for their answer. Sarah tried to pivot back to my fall. She said, "She's fixated on the house, Miss Lewis. She fell. She's clearly incapable of living alone, and she's being manipulated by some predatory lawyer." I countered immediately and calmly. I said, "Miss Lewis, I am 72 years old. And yes, I had a fall 3 weeks ago. I said I recovered fully. I am not on any medication that impairs my judgment, and I have full control of my financial affairs. David packed my bag for me. I am unfortunately without my checkbook or my financial statements, but I assure you I can access my accounts, and I am of sound mind to execute any document needed to manage my home and my assets." I had to stop myself from reaching for Anna's precious medication sheet. I knew I needed to save that for Mr. Davies and the court. David tried one last desperate attempt to regain control. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper full of threat. He said, "Mom, if you don't drop this injunction today, we are going to have to stop paying for your expensive lawyer, and we will have no choice but to start liquidating some of your other assets to cover the mounting legal fees you are creating." That threat, the mention of liquidating my other assets, my small retirement fund, was a low blow designed to terrify me, but it gave me the final piece of evidence I needed. I looked back at Miss Lewis, who was now writing furiously on her pad, and I spoke my final word on the matter. I said, "Miss Lewis, I believe the threat you just witnessed speaks for itself. I am under duress. I am being coerced,
and I am being financially blackmailed by my son to drop a legal action that protects my property. I believe this meeting should conclude now. I stood up before anyone could respond. My legs were shaking, but my head was clear. I simply walked out of the room, leaving David speechless and furious, Sarah scrambling to save face, and Miss Lewis sitting there with a clipboard full of undeniable evidence of coercion. David hadn't intimidated me. He had simply proved my case to the facility's own social worker. I knew the competency evaluation would still happen, but I walked away feeling like I had just won the first round. A victory bought with courage and Anna's dangerous whisper.
I didn't have much time to savor the small victory against David, because the very next hour I was escorted to the facility's small clinic for the competency evaluation, the moment Anna had warned me about. They wanted to officially declare me confused to nullify the injunction and regain control of my house. The aide who walked me down the hall was stiff and avoided eye contact, a sign that the staff knew exactly what was going on. The clinic room was bright, sterile, and cold. I sat on a thin, paper-covered table waiting for the doctor. Dr. Evans, a man in his late 50s with thin glasses and a perpetually tired expression. He didn't introduce himself warmly. He simply pulled up a stool and began to flip through my file. His silence was heavy, judgmental. I knew he was already primed by Mr. Sterling and David's frantic phone calls to find me lacking. He started with the standard questions, asking me to state the current date, the president, and the town we were in. I answered them clearly, immediately showing him I wasn't suffering from basic disorientation. But then he shifted tactics. He started asking tricky, subtle questions designed to make an older person stumble. He asked me to calculate the change from $20 if I bought 3 items costing $2.50 each. Then he asked me to draw a clock and set the time to 10 after 11. I performed all the tasks quickly and correctly, my mind sharp and focused, the adrenaline of the fight sharpening my wits. I knew that every correct answer was another nail in David's legal coffin. Then he got to the heart of the matter, the questions about my house and the contract. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and asked, "Martha, can you describe the nature of your current legal dispute with your son and what outcome you desire?" I looked him straight in the eye, refusing to be intimidated. I said, "Dr. Evans, the nature of the dispute is simple. My son, David, misrepresented my placement here as temporary recovery care, but simultaneously he executed a non-refundable, all-inclusive contract designed to deplete my assets, and he initiated the rapid sale of my co-owned home. The injunction was filed because this action constitutes financial exploitation and undue influence. I desire the immediate halt of the house sale and my prompt return to my residence." I used the precise legal terms Mr. Davies had taught me, and the doctor's pen paused mid-stroke. He clearly hadn't expected such a lucid, detailed explanation. He shuffled the papers, trying to hide his surprise, and then he brought up the core issue of competency. He said, "Martha, your son claims you were delusional when you told the social worker that they were trying to financially blackmail you. He claims your obsession with the sale is a symptom of paranoia." This was the trap, the moment I had prepared for. I looked him calmly and gave him the final piece of evidence from the morning meeting. I said, "Doctor, with all due respect, if I was delusional, why did my son, David, threaten to liquidate my other personal retirement assets right there in front of the facility's social worker, Miss Lewis, if I didn't immediately drop the injunction?" I said, "That is not paranoia, doctor. That is a factual statement made under duress, and Miss Lewis's notes will confirm that my son's actions and threats directly substantiate my claim of exploitation." Dr. Evans sat back slowly. The exhaustion in his face deepened. He looked genuinely conflicted, or perhaps just worried about the legal liability he was incurring by participating in this transparent scheme. He made a few more notes, asked a few more perfunctory questions about my mood and my appetite, and then he ended the exam. Abruptly, he simply said, "Thank you, Martha. That will be all." I knew I had won the competency test. I had stood my ground. I had used reason and David's own public threats as my shield. The aide walked me back to my room, but the atmosphere had changed. The staff now seemed more respectful, even slightly nervous. The word had spread. Martha was not crazy. Martha was fighting, and she was winning her battles with hard facts and clear thinking. I was back in my room waiting for the next move, but I knew David's legal team would receive Dr. Evans' report by the end of the day, and that report would not be what they wanted. It would not declare me incompetent. It would only confirm my lucidity, my strength, and the undeniable truth of my son's cold betrayal. The afternoon after the competency test was the quietest storm I'd ever experienced. The air in my little room felt thick with impending disaster. I didn't see David or Sarah again. They were likely huddled with their lawyers, digesting the brutal fact that Dr. Evans could not declare me incompetent, and that the emergency injunction was holding fast. Then the phone calls started. Not to me, of course. My outgoing line was still dead. But the facility's main line must have been ringing off the hook. I could hear the buzz and the low, frantic murmuring of the nurses and aides whenever they passed the station. They were all whispering about the legal mess and the high-profile case I had become. The most interesting and most dangerous resident in Sunny Glades. Around 4 o'clock, Mr. Sterling, the administrator, appeared at my door. This time, he wasn't stiff or annoyed. He was sweating visibly, wearing a look of deep professional panic. He asked to speak with me, and I allowed him into the room. His entire demeanor was different. He was polite, almost deferential. He said, "Martha, I have received an update from our legal counsel and from Dr. Evans. I understand your concerns are substantial and lucid." He quickly added, "The facility does not wish to be embroiled in a complex family dispute, and we have already contacted David's legal representative regarding the constraints of the emergency injunction." He was backtracking. He was covering the facility's liability. He was throwing David and Sarah under the bus to save his own skin. I just looked at him, waiting for the real information he was there to deliver. He eventually confessed. He said, "Martha, David has attempted to pay the next month's full fees for your non-refundable contract, but the injunction prevents us from accepting any further payments related to your long-term care or property divestment. Everything is frozen," he said, "until the court rules on your petition." I felt a surge of triumph. The injunction was working. It had cut off the money supply, the source of David and Sarah's power. Mr. Sterling then delivered the biggest change. He said, "Effective immediately, Martha, you are to have full access to a private phone line and your visitor restrictions are lifted. You are no longer considered a flight risk or a competency risk, and the facility encourages you to seek mediation with your family to resolve this property matter quickly." He handed me a landline telephone, a cheap plastic thing, but to me, it was a priceless connection to the outside world. The line to Mr. Davies, the line to my freedom. He then scurried out of the room, leaving me alone with my new weapon. The moment the door closed, I dialed Mr. Davies' direct office line. He answered on the first ring. I told him about the competency test, the doctor's reaction, and Mr. Sterling's panicked visit. Mr. Davies was calm and methodical. He said, "Excellent, Martha. This is the perfect outcome. Dr. Evans' report confirms your competency, and the facility's public retreat solidifies our case for undue influence." He said, "David's attempt to pay the next month's fees is evidence of their intention to keep you confined." He said, "The court has scheduled a preliminary hearing for next Monday morning." That was only 4 days away. He said, "We need to be ready, Martha. You need to provide more evidence of the immediate value of your home, its worth, and your financial reliance on that property." That was the key to making the court finalize the injunction and send me home. Over the next 2 days, David and Sarah tried a different tactic, the silent treatment. They didn't call, they didn't visit. They tried to make me feel isolated, abandoned, and guilty, hoping I would break down and call them to apologize and drop the case. But I didn't. I spent those days on my new phone line, calling old friends, my bank, the utility company, gathering small shreds of paper,
old bills, property tax records, anything to document my long history of managing my own life. I even called my husband's old friend, Mr. Harrison, a retired appraiser who knew the true value of our house. He agreed to provide a signed statement of the home's worth, a statement that would expose David's rushed, undervalued sale for what it was, another piece of the exploitation puzzle. I was no longer Martha, the betrayed mother. I was Martha, the investigator, the legal strategist. And my small room at Sunny Glades had been transformed from a prison into my war room, preparing for Monday morning, the day I would face my son and daughter-in-law across a courtroom and fight for the right to go back to my own kitchen, my own flowered wallpaper, and my own roses. The facility's sudden relaxation of rules meant I had a new, highly valuable freedom. I could arrange visitors beyond the prying eyes of David and Sarah. I had arranged for Mr. Harrison, my late husband's old friend, the retired appraiser, to visit me on Friday afternoon, 2 days before the hearing. Mr. Harrison was a man of quiet integrity, a dear man who knew exactly what that house meant to me and my late husband. When Mr. Harrison arrived, Mr. Henderson, the bow-tied guard, let him through without a single question. He was carrying a thick manila envelope and looked slightly uncomfortable being in a place like Sunny Glades. He found me in the quiet corner of the main lounge, away from the television noise and the staff traffic. I introduced him simply as a dear family friend, here to discuss some old business. I told Mr. Harrison everything about David and Sarah's plan, about the non-refundable contract and the rushed undermarket sale. He listened with a growing look of quiet fury and disappointment. He loved my husband, and he had known David since he was a boy. He shook his head slowly and said, "Martha, I suspected something was wrong when David called me last week, asking for a quick valuation. But he rushed me and asked me to keep the appraisal low, saying it was for an internal family transfer only." He then handed me the thick manila envelope. Inside was a detailed official appraisal report he had completed just that morning, showing the true market value of the house, a value that was nearly 30% higher than the quick sale price David and Sarah were trying to push through. The sale was a bargain, a clear attempt to liquidate quickly, even if it meant taking a loss just to ensure I was permanently out of the picture. He said, "Martha, I signed this affidavit. This house is worth every penny of this figure. The report proves they are not acting in your best financial interest. In fact," he said, "they are sacrificing a huge portion of your equity for speed and concealment. This document will be a bomb in the courtroom. It will demolish their story that this was all sensible financial planning." I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. This document wasn't just numbers, it was the physical proof of their calculated greed. It proved beyond a doubt that their motives were rooted in self-interest and not my well-being. As Mr. Harrison was getting ready to leave, another resident approached my table, Mrs. Peterson, a quiet woman who always sat in the same chair, knitting furiously. She looked nervous but determined. She leaned in close and whispered to me, "Martha, I overheard your son's conversation in the hall yesterday. I heard them saying they need to sell the antique silver as well before you get any more ideas." I looked at her stunned. The antique silver was my mother's collection, the only truly valuable heirloom I owned. It wasn't mentioned in the house sale, but it was kept in a locked cabinet in my dining room. They were planning to liquidate that too, to cover their mounting legal fees and perhaps to spite me. Mrs. Peterson continued, her voice barely audible. She said, "I know the cleaning lady, Carmen. She works early tomorrow morning. She has a key to your house. She goes to clean it before the buyers start looking. I saw David slip her an extra $20 bill to change the locks after her cleaning shift tomorrow. She is locking you out of your home for good before the hearing." This was a final desperate move by David and Sarah, locking me out physically after the injunction to assert their control and deny me any chance to even briefly visit the house before the hearing. It was a cruel final act of spite. I thanked Mrs. Peterson profusely and promised to be careful. This new piece of information was terrifying but also strategically invaluable. It gave me a new deadline, a new target. I immediately called Mr. Davies and relayed both pieces of information, the high appraisal and the imminent lock change. Mr. Davies was furious. He said, "This is outrageous, Martha. The lock change is a clear violation of the spirit of the injunction, intended to harass you." He said, "We can file a supplementary motion first thing Monday morning to demand immediate access and the return of your personal property. But," he said, "for now, you have the appraisal report. That is our centerpiece." He told me to come to his office on Sunday afternoon, the day before the hearing. He wanted to go over the final strategy and the order of witnesses. I was now moving from defense to full offense. I had my competency confirmed, my finances secure, and a lawyer who believed in me. My small war room at Sunny Glades was paying off, and I knew that David and Sarah were about to face a very prepared and very angry mother on Monday morning.
The 2 days between Friday and Sunday felt like a lifetime. I kept the appraisal report and the note about the lock change hidden in the small pillowcase. The linen Anna had provided me was still my lifeline. I spent all Saturday morning preparing a timeline of the betrayal, writing down every lie, every subtle manipulation David and Sarah had used from the moment of my fall to the threat in front of the social worker. I needed every detail crystal clear for Mr. Davies. Sunday arrived cold and bright, and I felt an electric tension thrumming beneath my skin. I had arranged the meeting with Mr. Davies for 3 o'clock. The facility was quiet on Sunday afternoons, perfect for a discreet exit. Mr. Sterling had made it clear that I could leave unescorted now, but I still felt the need for secrecy. I walked out the front door, past a surprisingly subdued Mr. Henderson, who just offered me a quiet, "Have a nice afternoon, Martha." I took a taxi to Mr. Davies's downtown office. The tall, modern building felt like the center of power and justice, a world away from the antiseptic quiet of Sunny Glades. Mr. Davies's office was warm and serious, filled with leather, books, and papers. He had a large whiteboard where he had already outlined our entire case using simple bullet points. He shook my hand firmly and looked at me with approval. He said, "Martha, you have been incredible. The evidence you secured is formidable." He pointed to the board where my evidence was listed in bold black writing. The first point read, "Competency confirmed," meaning Dr. Evans couldn't touch me. The second was, "Undervalued appraisal," meaning Mr. Harrison's report demolished their claim of sensible financial planning. And the third point, the most important, read, "Non-Refundable Fee Contract," proof of their intent to permanently divest my property. I handed him Mrs. Peterson's note about the antique silver and the lock change. Mr. Davies's face tightened with controlled anger. He said, "This lock change, Martha, this is a clear act of spite and calculated aggression. It shows the court they are trying to hide marital assets and prevent you from accessing personal property, a clear violation of the injunction's spirit. This changes our opening argument. We will use this to immediately ask the judge to order a one-time supervised return to your home to secure personal effects." He said, "Martha, you are the star witness. You need to be strong, calm, and focus entirely on the facts of the financial betrayal, not the emotional pain." "The emotional pain is assumed," he said. "The judge needs to see the cold, hard numbers of their greed." He told me to practice my testimony, to focus only on the sequence of events, the dates, and the dollar amounts. We spent 2 hours going over the exact script, the key phrases, the moments when I would look directly at the judge and deliver the undeniable truth of the non-refundable contract and the undervalued sale. He warned me again that David and Sarah's lawyer would try to confuse me, to make me angry, to make me cry and look unstable. But he said, "If you stay calm and stick to the facts, you win." As I was leaving, Mr. Davies put his hand on my shoulder and said, "One last thing, Martha." He said, "I need you to understand that David and Sarah will likely lose full control of the property tomorrow, and they will likely be facing legal consequences for their actions. This is a serious matter, and it will change your relationship with your son forever." I nodded slowly. I knew this. I had accepted the cost of my freedom, and my home was the final end of my relationship with David and Sarah. I took the taxi back to Sunny Glades, feeling an intense mixture of dread and fierce resolve. I was fully prepared. I had the facts,
the evidence, and the best lawyer a desperate woman could hope for. I was walking back into the prison tonight, but tomorrow I would walk out and face my son in the courtroom. Tomorrow was the day of reckoning, the day the silence finally broke and the truth would be shouted from the rooftops. I woke up before the first hint of dawn on Monday morning, the day of the preliminary hearing. I felt wide awake, alert, the kind of hyper-awareness that comes when you know your entire future is resting on the next few hours. I dressed carefully, in the best clothes I had brought with me, a simple navy dress and a comfortable, sensible jacket. I wanted to look dignified, competent, completely unlike the confused old woman David and Sarah had tried to create. I left my room at 7:30. The facility was just beginning to stir. The aides were pushing their carts, the smell of breakfast wafting down the hallway. I walked straight to the front desk. Mr. Henderson was there, setting up his security log. He looked at me and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the major event ahead. I called a taxi from the lobby and waited. The feeling of walking out of Sunny Glades for the final time, possibly the final time ever, was exhilarating. I didn't look back at the imposing brick building. I focused only on the street ahead and the taxi that would take me to the courthouse, the battleground where I would confront my son. The courthouse was a massive old stone building in the heart of the city, full of high ceilings and marble floors. It felt cold and impersonal, a place where truth was measured in legal documents, not in heartaches. I met Mr. Davies and Carol, his assistant, in the lobby. Mr. Davies looked professional and reassuring. He gave me a final quick briefing. He said, "Remember, Martha, focus on the facts, the non-refundable contract, the high appraisal, the lock change. Tell the story of the money, not the feeling." He led me into the courtroom, a large, quiet room filled with polished wood and long tables. The judge's bench loomed large and serious above everything. We sat at the plaintiff's table, our papers neatly stacked and organized, and then I saw them, David and Sarah. They walked in with a tall, thin lawyer wearing a suit that looked tailored in New York. They looked stressed, tense, and utterly furious when they saw me sitting there, calm and ready. They hadn't expected me to be so composed or so well dressed. David's lawyer looked over at Mr. Davies and gave a condescending smile, a professional air of superiority. He thought he was walking into a simple case of family misunderstanding, easily solved with a quick checkbook. But he was deeply mistaken. David wouldn't look at me. He kept staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. Sarah, however, couldn't resist. She stared right at me, her eyes hard and cold. I met her gaze and held it steady, a silent message passing between us. I know what you did, and you will not win. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. She was the one who finally broke the eye contact, turning away with a dismissive sigh. Then the court officer called the case. In re, the estate of Martha Davies, an emergency injunction. The judge walked in, a middle-aged woman with a stern but focused expression. She told everyone to be seated, and she immediately got down to business. She said this hearing is to determine whether the existing emergency restraining order, freezing the property sale and assets, should be made permanent pending a full trial. And she said, "I have read the affidavits." Mr. Davies stood up first, and his opening statement was devastating. He didn't waste time on emotion. He went straight for the jugular. He spoke about the non-refundable all-inclusive contract, which he said was clear evidence of premeditated divestment. He spoke about Mr. Harrison's high appraisal, which proved that David was willing to sacrifice 30% of his mother's equity for a rushed sale. And then he added the lock change. Mr. Davies said, "Your Honor, just this past weekend, the defendants attempted to change the locks on the residence in direct violation of the spirit of this court's injunction, showing a clear intent to deny the plaintiff any access to her personal property and personal effects. This is not the action of a concerned son, Your Honor. This is the action of a desperate co-owner trying to seize full control of an asset." David's lawyer jumped up, trying to object, trying to dismiss the lock change as minor and irrelevant. But the judge stopped him cold. She looked sternly at David's lawyer and said, "Counselor, the changing of locks on a residence under a property injunction is never irrelevant." Then Mr. Davies said, "Your Honor, the plaintiff, Martha Davies, is present today. She is of sound mind, and she is prepared to testify about the coercion and the threats she faced at the hands of her son and daughter-in-law." The judge looked directly at me, and then she said, "Mr. Davies, call your first witness." My heart gave a sudden thump, a sharp, nervous throb. I knew this was it, my moment to speak my truth, not in a whispered conversation in a car or a shout in a dining hall, but to the highest authority. I would speak the clear, cold facts that would finally set me free.
Mr. Davies said, "Martha, please take the stand." I rose slowly but steadily and walked towards the witness box. The wooden railing felt smooth and cool beneath my hand. I looked past the lawyers, past David and Sarah, who were watching me with intense, hostile focus, and I looked directly at the judge. I took the oath, my voice clear and unwavering. I knew I was speaking not just for myself, but for every elderly woman who had ever felt silenced or dismissed. Mr. Davies began his questions gently, asking me to confirm my age, my residence, and my recovery from my fall. I answered succinctly, keeping the focus strictly on my current health and my lucidity. Then he guided me to the day of the betrayal, the moment in my flowered kitchen. He asked me, "Martha, did your son David or his wife Sarah ever inform you that the placement at Sunnyglades was contingent upon the immediate sale of your property?" I said, "No, sir, they did not. They told me it was temporary care, a recovery period." He then asked, "Martha, when did you first become aware of the true nature of the contract regarding your care at Sunnyglades?" I took a deep breath and delivered the line I had rehearsed in my mind for days. I said, "I only became aware of the irreversible nature of my placement when a kind nurse showed me the paperwork showing that my son had paid the non-refundable, all-inclusive fee, a fee I was told was used exclusively for long-term permanent residency." Mr. Davies let that sink in. The weight of the words non-refundable and permanent residency hung heavy in the courtroom. He then asked, "Martha, what was the effect of this discovery on you?" I avoided the emotional answer. I stayed factual. I said, "The effect was immediate clarity, sir. I realized the sale of my house was not a necessity for my care. It was the purpose of my confinement. They needed me in that locked-in contract to justify the rapid liquidation of my assets." David's lawyer jumped up, trying to object. "Your Honor, leading the witness and speculation." But the judge waved him down. She told me to continue. I looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, my son threatened me during a meeting with the facility social worker. He threatened to liquidate my other retirement assets if I did not immediately drop this injunction. That is not the action of a loving son seeking recovery. That is coercion seeking profit." The courtroom was utterly silent. The air crackled with the gravity of the accusation. I could see Sarah nervously fiddling with her wedding ring. David looked sick, pale, and cornered, his own public threats now being used as irrefutable evidence against him. Then came the cross-examination. David's lawyer, a tall, intimidating man with a booming voice, stepped up. He tried to tear down my testimony. He started by trying to paint me as confused and frail. He asked me about my medication, my recent fall, my need for assisted living services, trying to prove I was unfit to manage my affairs. He asked me, "Martha,
isn't it true you fell and broke your wrist and needed continuous monitoring and care? I said, yes, sir, I fell. I said, and isn't it true you only learned about the contract from an anonymous source, a nurse who breached confidentiality? I said, I learned the truth from a conscientious employee who witnessed a grave injustice, sir. He tried to twist the knife. He said, Mrs. Davies, your son was trying to protect you from yourself, and you have rewarded his efforts by dragging him into court, accusing him of theft, and costing him thousands in legal fees. Are you not simply an angry, resentful mother punishing her successful son? I looked at him and then directly at the judge. I said, I am not angry, sir. I am seeking justice. I said, the facts are simple. The non-refundable fee was paid to lock me in, the appraisal was grossly undervalued to rush the sale, and the locks were changed to keep me out. I said, these are not the actions of protection, sir. These are the actions of predation. The judge leaned forward, watching my face intently. The lawyer had no answer for the calm, factual force of my testimony. He couldn't break me, he couldn't make me cry, he couldn't make me contradict myself, because I was only telling the truth, the cold, hard truth of David's betrayal. After a moment of awkward silence, he just mumbled, "No further questions, Your Honor." As I stepped down from the witness box, I glanced at David. He looked completely defeated. His eyes were full of a mix of shame and a bitter, final hatred, but I didn't care about his feelings anymore. I had done what I had to do. I had spoken the truth, and now the judgment was in the hands of the court.
After my testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. The judge called a 15-minute recess. But I didn't leave the room. I stayed seated at the plaintiff's table, absorbing this silence, the gravity of the moments that had just transpired. Mr. Davies leaned over and whispered, "You were perfect, Martha. You stuck to the facts. Their case is severely damaged," he said. "Their lawyer looks completely unprepared to deal with the truth of the financial documents." David and Sarah and their lawyer huddled outside the courtroom doors, talking in low, urgent tones. I could see Sarah gesturing wildly, her face flushed with fury, clearly directing her lawyer to fight back harder. But it was too late. The truth was already on the record, and it was damning. When the judge returned, she didn't waste any time. She bypassed the usual formalities and spoke with an air of finality. She addressed David's lawyer and said, "Counselor, the evidence presented by the plaintiff concerning the non-refundable all-inclusive fee, the immediate rush to sell a co-owned property at an undervalued price, and the subsequent attempts to change the locks and restrict communication paints a very clear picture." She said, "This is not a case of a loving son seeking appropriate care for his mother. This is a documented case of undue influence and suspected financial exploitation. I am deeply troubled by the calculated nature of the defendant's actions, particularly the threat to liquidate the plaintiff's remaining assets if she did not drop the injunction. That statement standing alone seriously compromises the defendant's motives." The judge then delivered the final hammer blow, the words I had waited weeks to hear. She said, "Therefore, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff, Martha Davies. The emergency injunction is made permanent pending a full trial on the merits. I am ordering the immediate halt of any and all proceedings regarding the sale of the residence located at the specified address." She continued, her voice firm and decisive. "Furthermore, I am ordering the defendants, David and Sarah Davies, to surrender all keys to the property immediately to Mr. Davies' counsel, and I am ordering that the plaintiff, Martha Davies, be permitted one supervised visit to the property within 48 hours to retrieve personal documents and effects and to arrange for her safe return to the residence." The entire courtroom seemed to exhale at once. David's lawyer was arguing immediately, trying to get a stay of the order, trying to delay my return. But the judge shut him down. She said, "Counselor, this is not debatable.
The plaintiff is of sound mind and she is going home. The matter is concluded for today. A wave of intense relief washed over me. It was a physical sensation, like a tight band around my chest finally snapping. I was going home. I looked at Mr. Davies and he gave me a silent, victorious nod. Carol, the assistant, was already gathering the papers to serve the official order immediately. I looked across the table at David and Sarah. They were in shock. David's head was buried in his hands, shaking slightly. Sarah was staring straight at me, her eyes blazing with an ice-cold, furious hatred. I knew then that this victory was the end of our relationship. There would be no going back, no reconciliation. The cost of my freedom was my son's love, or rather, the illusion of his love. Mr. Davies walked over to them and formally demanded the house keys. David's lawyer whispered something to him, and David reluctantly pulled a set of keys from his pocket and slammed them onto the table. The sound was sharp and final, the physical relinquishing of control. Mr. Davies immediately turned to me and said, "Martha, we will arrange the supervised visit for tomorrow morning. You are going home." I couldn't speak, I just nodded, tears finally blurring my vision. Not tears of sadness, but of sheer exhausted triumph. I had fought the fight of my life, and I had won the right to return to my own kitchen, my own flowered wallpaper, and my own roses. The day after the hearing felt like the first day of a new life. Mr. Davies arranged the supervised visit for 10 o'clock the next morning. I didn't return to Sunny Glades. I stayed in a small, clean hotel room arranged by Mr. Davies' office. I spent the evening preparing not for a legal battle, but for an emotional one, facing the ghosts of my house and the proof of David and Sarah's invasion. At 10 a.m., I met Mr. Davies and a court-appointed supervising officer outside the familiar white picket fence of my house. The house looked exactly the same, the rose bushes heavy with late blooms, the porch swing gently swaying, but it felt different, wounded. The court officer was a quiet woman whose presence ensured that David and Sarah could not harass me or interfere. Mr. Davies used the keys David had surrendered and opened the front door. The smell of my home hit me first, a blend of old wood dust and the lingering scent of my husband's pipe tobacco, a smell I hadn't realized I missed so desperately. I stepped inside, and the immediate emptiness was a punch to the gut. The house was not just empty of furniture, it was stripped. The moving van had taken everything, the sofa, the dining table, the lamps. But it was the small, personal details that hurt the most. The wall where my husband's framed Navy photos used to hang was just a lighter patch of faded wallpaper. The kitchen cabinets were bare. The little ceramic bird I kept on the windowsill was gone. I walked through the rooms, the hollow echo of my footsteps mocking the life that had once filled these spaces. The house felt cold, impersonal, like a museum of a life I no longer owned. David and Sarah had successfully managed to erase me, even if they hadn't managed to sell the walls. Mr. Davies kept close but gave me space. I had two goals. The first was to retrieve my mother's antique silver. The second was to retrieve the personal documents they had deliberately left behind. He pointed to the dining room where the silver cabinet used to stand. I walked over to the spot and saw only dust marks on the floor. The heavy antique silver cabinet was gone, along with the silver inside. They had liquidated it, just as Mrs. Peterson had warned. They had sold my inheritance, my mother's legacy, for quick cash to fund their legal fight against me. A wave of bitter disappointment washed over me. It was a spiteful act, a final petty theft to punish me for fighting back. Mr. Davies noticed my distress and asked what was missing. I simply said, "They have sold the antique silver, the family heirlooms." He immediately took out his notepad and made a note. He said, "That is a clear violation of personal property rights, Martha. We will add this to the complaint. This shows willful malice." My second goal was easier. I walked into my old bedroom. The walk-in closet David had cleared out was empty, but I knew where my husband kept his most important papers. I pulled up the loose floorboard under the carpet in the corner of the closet, a secret place only my husband and I knew about. And there they were, a stack of documents tied with an old string. Inside the packet were my original marriage certificate, my late husband's last will and testament, and the original deed to the house. The deeds proving not just my co-ownership, but the history of the house since my husband's parents first bought it. These were the foundational documents needed to fully secure my claim and manage my return. I placed them carefully into my handbag. As we were leaving, I stood on the porch and looked at the rose bushes. They were still mine, they were still alive. David and Sarah couldn't strip the life from the earth or the memories from my mind. I turned to Mr. Davies and said, "I have what I need, Mr. Davies, let's go home." He smiled and corrected me. He said, "No, Martha, let's go file the paperwork to ensure you can come back home permanently." We left the empty shell of the house. I knew the immediate return would be difficult. I had no furniture, no clothes besides the small bag I carried. But I had the keys, I had the deeds, and I had the victory. The court had returned the house to me. Now it was up to me to fill it again with life and to finally close the door on the man my son had become.
The preliminary hearing victory was not the end, but the beginning of the final negotiation. Mr. Davies filed a motion for summary judgment, using the evidence, the undervalued appraisal, the non-refundable contract, and the lock change attempt, to argue that David and Sarah's intent to exploit was so clear that a full, costly trial was unnecessary. The pressure on David and Sarah was immense. Their lawyer called Mr. Davies immediately, suggesting mediation. They knew they couldn't win a full trial. My testimony had proven I was competent, and the financial documents proved their calculated greed. The judge's strong wording about predation had scared them into submission. I sat with Mr. Davies in a sterile conference room a week later for the mediation. David and Sarah sat across the large table with their lawyer. The atmosphere was thick with resentment. Sarah refused to look at me, but David, pale and drawn, met my eye once, a flicker of something, not love, but deep, bitter defeat. The mediator, a retired judge, laid out the facts. David and Sarah had initiated a legal conflict based on misrepresentation and coercion, causing me financial and emotional distress. He made it clear they were on the defensive. The settlement was harsh and uncompromising, dictated entirely by the strength of our case. Immediate withdrawal. David and Sarah had to immediately and permanently withdraw any claim to the house and sign a quitclaim deed transferring David's co-ownership to me, removing his legal ties completely. Reimbursement. They were forced to reimburse me for all legal fees incurred fighting the injunction and the cost of the antiques they had sold, the silver. This was a financial blow designed to hurt them. Non-disclosure clause. A standard clause, but one I insisted upon. They were forbidden from ever publicly discussing the details of the settlement or the case, protecting my privacy and the facility, Sunny Glades, from further bad press. I looked at David as he signed the final document his lawyer pushed in front of him. His hand shook slightly. He had traded his birthright, his inheritance, and his mother's love for a few weeks of rushed illegal control, and now faced a significant debt. The true cost of his sensible choice was finally due. As the meeting concluded, David approached me. Mr. Davies stepped forward, but I waved him back. David looked at me, not with remorse, but with hollow confusion. He simply said, "Mom, why did you do this? We just wanted you safe." I looked at him, searching for the boy I had raised, and found only the calculating man Sarah had fostered. I replied quietly, firmly, "You didn't want me safe, David. You wanted me gone, and you wanted the house empty. You treated me like a financial liability, and now you have the corresponding financial consequence. You forced me to choose between my home and your illusion. I chose my home." I didn't wait for a reply. I simply gathered my coat and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there with Sarah, who had already pulled out her phone, focused on the next crisis. The final emotional tie was severed. That evening, I drove to my house, alone. It was still empty, but this time, the emptiness felt different. It felt full of potential, not despair. I put the keys in the lock, turned the bolt, and walked into my home as the sole owner.
the sole protector of my husband's legacy. My first act was to call Anna. She was thrilled, crying happy tears when I told her the injunction was permanent and the settlement finalized. I told her the first thing I would do when I had access to my accounts was send her a substantial check, not just as a reward, but as a recognition of her profound moral courage. She had risked her livelihood to save mine. Over the next few weeks, I bought a comfortable new armchair, a kettle, and a small table. I didn't rush to fill the house with new furniture. I was taking my time, savoring the slow, deliberate process of rebuilding. One sunny afternoon, I was out in the garden, pruning my husband's roses. They were thriving, resilient. As I worked, a large, expensive delivery truck pulled up outside. A man walked up the path carrying a massive bouquet of my favorite pink roses. He handed me a small card, and my hand trembled as I opened it. It was from David. The card simply read, "Mom, I hope the roses are well. I'm sorry." There was no attempt to call, no request to visit, just a distant, final acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. I looked at the beautiful bouquet of pink roses, and then at the healthy red ones growing in my garden. I took the new roses, thanked the delivery man, and placed the bouquet on the empty spot where my dining table used to stand. I didn't feel forgiveness, but I felt closure. My home was now a monument to my resilience, a quiet testament to the fact that strength and fight do not diminish with age. I had lost a son, but I had gained back my life, my dignity, and my home. And as I sat on my porch swing, surrounded by the scent of my husband's roses, I knew that this beautiful, hard-won peace was the final, sweetest victory. This is where my story ends, for now. But remember this: never let anyone decide your worth or your future based on your age. If you feel that familiar lump in your throat, hit that like button, share this video, and comment below. Your support fuels the voice of every person fighting for their dignity.